Alright, what's poppin', people? It's 4:30 a.m. I'm tired as hell. And yet, we're still recording this video because second council voting of September's gone up, and DRAMPA and VIKAVOLT and TOXICROAK have all been banned from NU. And as I say that, I just now noticed that I am forgetting to have a TOXICROAK slot in here, so we're gonna just put this in here now. But I can talk while I do this. I was not really surprised by the results of these voting. I think going into it, the one I was the most surprised about was Croak going, or coming out of it. I did vote bad on Croak, but people really hadn't been talking about TOXICROAK all that much, I don't think. I feel like people had been so much more focused on all the new drops that Croak had kind of been forgotten about. Despite it still being, in my eyes, an easily S rank, contending for the role of, best wall breaker in the tier. But it still did go. I think this is an overall positive for the tier, personally. But I do have some gripes about one of these bans. So, obviously you can view the MP thread, and that'll tell you, I'm going to exile this, but that'll tell you obviously what I voted, and I already made a post in there, but I do still want to talk about just in general why these Pokemon were banned, and then give my overall thoughts. So I'm going to start off with the two Pokemon that I do personally agree with on voting ban, because I think it's easier. So let's talk about TOXICROAK first, because I think it's a very interesting Pokemon. And we look at TOXICROAK's history through NU, it's very interesting, because originally, the most common sets for Swords Dance, like immediately, that was what you saw. You saw SD, you saw SD, Gunk Shot, Drain Punch, Sucker Punch. That was like everyone ran. But as the tier went on, you saw sets diverge. You saw some Choice Scarf picking up. You saw Nasty Plot get usage. And in recent months, special attacking Croak has just picked up so hard. Not necessarily Nasty Plot though, as I have it here, this is more what you see. Choice Specs as another option as well. You see that, or Life Orb here. But you're seeing a lot more special Croak, and why is that? Well, TOXICROAK counterplay, if you run special, is a lot more limited, at least when you look at it defensively. It's really only specially defensive Garbodor and Gastrodon that are consistent answers to all attacking Croak. You have options like Weezing, Kofa, Rotom. These can pivot into TOXICROAK, but as we've seen with this set, and again, I'm really pointing out to Life Orb in specific because I think this is just so much more punishing for a lot of these Pokemon to try to deal with. Unlike some of the more prediction reliant breakers, like say Choice Specs Decidueye, or Choice Specs Drampa even, or maybe, I don't know, Drampa does just kind of click Jacob Meteor. But unlike more prediction reliant wall breakers, I'll Rabombi out there, Choice Specs Rabombi. This TOXICROAK set doesn't really care, because a lot of its switch-ins are slower than it, and don't want to be poisoned, if we're ignoring like Garbodor. And so, it was such a hard Pokemon to try to pivot around, because yes, there are immunities to Sludge Bomb, there are immunities to Focus Blast, there are immunities to even Shadow Ball. But it doesn't matter if you can't ever outspeed Croak. If you can't safely get in your Revengekiller versus it, and Croak gets in on a Pokemon that forces out, like say Ferroseed, it's just so hard to actually figure a way out to deal with it. And I think that's also why we've seen less Nasty Plot, because having the ability, or having to pick between these four moves, having to drop one for Plot, has always been just kind of difficult to do, I feel. And so, once people realized, hey, you don't really need Plot to break anything anymore, especially right now with a lot of the more common Pokemon that kinda check Croak, not really holding up in terms of like actually beating it. They check it defensively, but then they don't do anything. It's like Jellicent, unless you run Psychic randomly. You're switching in, and then you're saying, alright, I guess I'm burning it, and then I'm switching out. There wasn't really anything you could do. And so, people have just been able to take advantage really well of running all these moves. Because now, you always have Vacuum Wave. I don't know, Revenge Kill something like, say, a Duraludon if it's trying to force a Speed Tie, or a Sneasel if it wants to outspeed you and KO you with Choice Banded Icicle Crash. You always have Focus Blast, so you're always going to be able to hit Mudsdale for a heavy hit. You always have Sludge Bomb, so it's not like the fairies are ever switching into you. And you always have Shadow Ball, so that you can hit those incredibly just smart users that were pointing out how Nasty Plot TOXICROAK could technically be walled by Ghastly. God, I still hate that people said that unironically, man. It was so triggering. But yeah, this set in particular, I think, this is what I point to as the main reason Croak got banned. It's just so punishing to try to switch around the all-out attacking Croak, be it Specs, be it Life Orb. Either variant really works. This Pokemon had been in the tier since the inception, and I do think, even if we hadn't banned it, that the tier would have been fine. Because, you know, consider the fact that power level did go up in the tier when we got the DLC drops. Croak was still a top tier threat. I think we could have still managed with it. It's not that it's impossible to play around. I think it's just banning it really opens up breathing room, I think, for a lot of teams. You're not having to like put into your game plan just these weird sequences, I think, against TOXICROAK anymore. I do think another underrated bit about Croak is like the combination of its defensive utility and speed. Because it does just let it threaten a lot more stuff than it otherwise would. Let it get a lot more chances to switch in as well. Dry Skin letting it also just say, oh, Scald, you heal me now? Yeah, it's just annoying. And then Choice Scarf TOXICROAK, I hate this set personally, but it is viable. Revenge killing something like Sneasel still, obviously, this set does that as well. But this one does it too, damn it. And, you know, Revenge killing, say, like Ninetales, Rabombi, a boosted Frostmoth, things like that. My main gripe with this set has always been that it's walled by, like, Kofa, Weezing, and the... Oh, what was it? Rhydon, for some reason, takes, like, 33 from Drain Punch. It's really sad. You know, I see a Rhydon at, like, 40%, I go out to my Croak, I'm like, yeah, I'm a Revenge Kill it, and then I just don't. I remember always running Cross Chop back on Choice Scarf TOXICROAK, back when Silvally Dark was super prevalent. And, yeah, it was entirely to Oko that, because Drain Punch from Croak is just weak. TOXICROAK's banned now, though, and I do think that is overall going to be a net positive for the tier, even though we probably could have kept it in check. I think this is overall moving the tier in a good direction. Should also open up more Gallade in the tier. Gallade was already getting used a fair bit, and I think it's just even better now, with no longer having to compete with Croak. Other fighting types we don't really have, is the thing, because like there's Sock, but that's unviable. Girder does get opened up a fair bit as well. Bulk up sets are a lot more annoying now, because Croak doesn't just exist, and to it KO you with, you know, Sludge Bomb. So maybe we see more Girder. Who else? Polyrath, I don't really think benefits from Croak going, because they didn't really do anything the same. Sock is just... Sock's issue will always be that it competes with Gallade more than it ever did with Croak. So I don't see this change really doing anything for Sock. Unless you want to talk about like how Sock's speed tier being better than Gallade's and actually being equivalent to Croak's gives it a niche as a Choice Scarf user now. Maybe there's that argument, but I'm not a fan. Now let's go to VIKAVOLT. So this was a Pokemon that obviously I nominated at first to get banned on the first slate, and it didn't. But now we're here and VIKAVOLT's gone the second time. And my argument had always been that nothing had really changed for VIKAVOLT. Between April is when we are... March. March is when we banned it originally, yeah. Because that was when we were in beta. Nothing really changed for it, though. Outside of there being a few more Pokemon that are faster, the tier was the same. You know, you had the same do-nothing Pokemon that would try to check it and really not do much of anything other than seed momentum to the opponent, the VIKAVOLT user. And while we had Pokemon like Whimsicott and Rabombi, Sneasel, these Pokemon don't Oko VIKAVOLT. At least I know Rabombi and Whimsy don't. Maybe Sneasel does. Nox doing as bonkers damage as it sometimes does. But VIKAVOLT's bulk, its ability to levitate, and access to Roost, just make so hard to actually like chip away at. It finds a lot more opportunities to switch in than it really should. As a result, it can be at times really pressing to actually revenge kill it, despite it being so slow. And this is going to tie into my Drampa point. But a big reason that I think VIKAVOLT was so good is the access to sticky web and agility. So, when we talk about counterplay to slow wall breakers, I think most typically the reliable way of dealing with them is going to be through fast Pokemon. Pokemon like just come in, maybe you have to like switch into a resisted hit to do it, but Pokemon just come in and say, alright, I'm going to kill you now from full because I'm strong, I'm faster than you, and I take advantage of how slow you are to not have to, fear anything. VIKAVOLT doesn't care. It has sticky web. VIKAVOLT doesn't care. It has agility. And obviously agility VIKAVOLT's more meant to be an endgame Pokemon, and I imagine you could also do Roost here. I just have Energy Ball because I kind of like the idea of having an agility setup and then having nothing at all that really wants to switch into you. That just sounds fun. But these kinds of sets flip a lot of counterplay on top of their heads. Sticky Web prevents things like, say, I'm trying to think of a fast Pokemon that would actually be slower than VIKAVOLT with webs up, and it's really hard. All Attacker Croak, like Special Croak, that would actually be slower than you if you got webs up. It's gonna be pretty much anything with like base 85 speed and below. It's like, well, we're talking about Croak, Duraludon, although do you really do anything back to Duraludon? Well, Duraludon's pretty frail, so probably. As I go through the list here, you can see just other Pokemon that don't end up handling you anymore. It's just annoying. And then agility is the same thing. Obviously giving up a bit of team support through like Volt Switch, Sticky Web, even for team support, for just outspeeding even more stuff. Now you're even getting to jump on things like Ninetales or Bombi, Whimsicott. It's just, I view this as a really unhealthy interaction, personally. I don't like that these slow wall breakers that are already troublesome enough to switch into and deal with, just decide to make even more of their counterplay trivialized. Pretty much just neutered and removed. Maybe I'm just thinking a little bit too basic here, and I'm wanting my counterplay to be really linear. I think that's a fair counterpoint, but I feel that when counterplay starts getting really undefined to Pokemon, just due to good sets and how diverse a Pokemon's good sets can be. Notice how I say good, because some Pokemon have other sets that just aren't as good, even though they shift up counterplay. A la physical, like SD Croak versus Nasty Plot Croak back in a period of time, like around May maybe, when those two sets were a bit more equal in viability. I don't like when you get sets like these that just say, okay, generally you check me, but now you don't. Generally you check me, but now you don't. I don't think it's good for the game. I think it makes trying to play around these Pokemon a lot more tasking than it needs to be. It makes your counterplay just a lot more situational as well. It's like, oh, yeah, Choice Picks for Bombi is a check to VIKAVOLT if it doesn't have an agility up, things like that. And again, VIKAVOLT has a lot of other things going for it beyond just being hard to wall and having ways to beat up on the fast things. It's also just defensive utility. 77, 90, 75 is not bad for a wall breaker. Those are pretty good defensive stats. Levitate makes it so you can switch into stuff like Rhydon, Mudsdale. Its typing's pretty decent as well. I really like that fighting resistance. Heavy Duty Boots and Roost just make you so hard to chip down. I viewed VIKAVOLT as a really obvious ban last week, and obviously I still viewed it as a really obvious ban this week. Now we get to Drampa. Now this is a Pokemon that I didn't vote ban on, and I'm pretty strongly anti-ban on it, but I can still obviously give insight as to why we did vote ban. But I will talk about why I was anti-ban, and again, this does go back to my post that I made in the NP thread. If you want to go hunt that down, you can, but I'll try to regurgitate most of it here for y'all anyway. So, Drampa. Let's get here. This is a big number. This makes that number go even higher. This is a strong move that gets Stab. You're noticing why this mon was, a little bit contentious in the tier. I mean, shit. Even resists to Spec to Draco were taking, like, at times over 50. Things like Phariseed, Gallerfisk, Savali Steel really didn't want to take this move ever. And, like, the fairies just all got blasted by Hyper Voice. And so Drampa forced a lot of these nasty 50-50s between just its stab moves alone. And then it had, of course, Flamethrower, which is generally a safe mid-ground. Like, most of the time you'd have any move as a safe mid-ground. It's just a Flamethrower has no immunity outside of Ninetales, and if you bring Ninetales in versus a Drampa, I really don't know what's wrong with you. You've got something wrong in your head, but beyond just being a deadly wall breaker, I think Drampa's set versatility definitely gave people a lot of headaches. I've tried to set utility, because I have Defog here, you could definitely run Glare. It was done in the past, I don't see why it wouldn't be good now. It's just Defog is a lot better, I would say. I think Drampa's defensive utility really lent it to a lot of teams. As a nice check to things like, say, Decidueye, the water types, etc. And so you'd have this kind of set, which could make use of Berserk and Roost to both stay healthy and consistently get boosts. I think you'd also run like Hyper Voice over Draco Meteor. I just have the Draco here because getting walled by Jellicent sucks. And admittedly, this on the Calm Mind Drampa's weird. Because, like, figuring out the moves you want is not easy. I probably would say Dragon Pulse, actually, over Hyper Voice. I think getting rid of Clefairy is not the worst ask. Plus, you can Calm Mind up versus that. Yeah, Defog Drampa, or Utility Drampa in general, was really good at just still firing off strong Dracos. And also just providing a little bit of extra utility through Defog and its defensive stuff. While Calm Mind Drampa was just really good at taking over games against the passive Pokemon that would sometimes be, thrown at it and just told, hey, stop this. But I still didn't view this as pushing Drampa over the edge. And this goes back to my point about slow wall breakers. So, we can compare Drampa to Alolan Exeggutor, I think, really easily here. They're both slow Dragon-type wall breakers with good defensive utility, which, lends them to finding more chances to switch in. I'll even hover over specs while we talk about the scary set. They both have super strong Draco Meteors. They have ways of pressuring their general switch-ins just by hitting them with a resisted move. So why is Alolan Exeggutor, in my eyes, significantly more broken than Drampa? Well, there's a couple reasons. The first is Alolan Exeggutor's stab moves are better. It's got Leaf Storm as well as Draco. And Alolan Exeggutor also has Trick Room. We'll get back to Trick Room later, but I think, based on the earlier part of the video, it should be pretty obvious why I think Trick Room is an issue. So let's talk about Leaf Storm and why it makes it Alolan Exeggutor good, or just in general, having Grass Stab. So, Drampa, there's always the argument against Drampa that you can predict around it, because both Draco and Hyper Voice have immunities. Common immunities as well. Ghost types are not at all uncommon in NU. Fairy types are not at all uncommon in NU. And because Protect was getting a lot more usage recently on Pokemon like, say, Galarian Stunfisk, there was a lot more room to counterplay, or a lot more room for counterplay against Choice Specs Drampa. If you could just get a turn to figure out what it wanted to go for, you trivialized how you had to play against it a lot more easily, so long as you had teammates to do it. And that doesn't mean Choice Specs Drampa was all of a sudden bad. You had to get those opportunities for Pokemon like Galarian Stunfisk and especially defensive Aromatisse to go for Protect and Scout it. But there was more counterplay that people were finding. Well, with Alolan Exeggutor, it's harder to just have a Mono take Leaf Storm. And I say there's no immunities. There technically are. But I don't think we're really gonna want to say Sap Sipper, Drampa, and Miltank as just yes, these are just immunities to Alolan Exeggutor's Leaf Storm. I'm not counting them. Maybe I should, but I'm not for this example. But it just meant that Alolan Exeggutor had an even less drawback ridden button that it could go for than Drampa. And it's also just really nice because being able to hit Galarian Stunfisk for even more as it's trying to switch into a Draco was just really nice. I mean, it really removed Galarian Stunfisk as an answer, I would argue, to Alolan Eggy, because you just couldn't reliably come in. Galarifisk was a good check to Drampa, or a check to Drampa, because you at least resisted both of its stab moves. If you got hit by Flamethrower, okay, you got me. But it going for Flamethrower is like the least scary move possible. Well, in Exeggutor, you don't know which move it's going for between its stab attacks. That makes it a lot harder to play with, because Leaf Storm is just so drawback free. And I want to also talk about Trick Room, right? As I obviously very powerfully alluded to when I just waved this mouse over VIKAVOLT. Alolan Exeggutor being able to flip offensive matchups that were generally bad on their head and make them good matchups was a huge reason that I thought it was problematic. You know, being able to turn all these poor matchups against Pokemon like Rabombi and Whimsicott into just free wins, I didn't particularly view in a very positive light. Because the trade-off was so minuscule. You didn't really lose many defensive matchups. It was like Clefairy and maybe Spadef Aromatisse, which I didn't see a whole lot of back when Alolan Eggy was around. I didn't really see it get talked about at all. But the amount of matchups that you lost compared to the amount of matchups that you gained by running Trick Room, in my eyes, was just so worth it. And I know people, this can be compared with Drampa right here, because people have harped on this set as like, oh, this is just so unfair. It just makes passive Pokemon really bad, and it just means Drampa beats them up. And I'd kind of argue Drampa already did. Like, I've always viewed these slow wall breakers as really good at punishing passive counterplay. They hit you really fucking hard, and if you can't get rid of them, they're going to hit you really fucking hard again. And so, like, Calm Mind Drampa, yeah, something like Clefairy maybe doesn't beat this anymore. But, like, this set really already beat Clefairy. Like, Drampa I don't think Calm Mind's, like, necessarily that amazing. And it does extend beyond, like, say, Clefairy and Galarisk, right? You can take on, like, something like Silvally Steel a little bit easier. Some of those, like, not as strong physical attackers do struggle a little bit more. But, like, Choice Spec sets already just giga pounded them into the dirt. They just didn't have the ability to take a lot of Dracos a lot of the time. Drampa's coverage and power was just so much that they couldn't stay up with it. And so I felt that Calm Mind sets, the amount of matchups that you gained with Calm Mind wasn't really that many. It was more that, like, instead of Drampa hitting these Pokemon hard and it's switching out, Drampa instead would Calm Mind up against them, and then maybe they'd have to make some reactive play. But I don't really view that line as much in favor of Drampa. When you say very sort of like specs, there's like more defensive utility, like 1000%. But I don't really feel like this Pokemon is all of a sudden just becoming so much more of an overall threat to more Pokemon, like a greater amount of Pokemon, just because it has Calm Mind here. I felt that Drampa was mostly keeping the same amount of matchups, while compared to Alolan Exeggutor or say even VIKAVOLT, these Pokemon being able to just straight up pretty much remove offensive counterplay while still retaining a lot, like especially VIKAVOLT, right? Because it's not Specs VIKAVOLT, I don't think really ever took off. Like Specs Eggy, yeah, you lost a couple matchups, but it wasn't really gonna stop you from being a menace to almost every team. And you just ended up being more of a menace because people are like, oh, I'm gonna revenge kill you with Toxicroak, and then you said, oh, no you're not. Anyhow, that's my spiel. Drampa's gone now, and I do think that's still nice for the tier in general, but I do feel like there will be a lot of negatives as a result as well. I think Drampa provided a lot for the tier, and I don't think that removing it was the right decision. At the end of the day, do I necessarily mind banning out a really strong wall breaker? No, but I also don't think we needed to. And so, I'm not going to harp on it a whole bunch. What's done is done. But we'll see how the tier shapes out now. Ninetales, I think, has gotten a lot better. I think even things like Gastrodon and Jellicent get a lot better too, because Drampa was really good at taking advantage of them. Like, Jellicent's so much better now. Wow, like, all three of these Pokemon going for it, amazing. Part of me also wonders if, like, offensive Jellicent's worth messing around with at all. Might try it out. That's going to be it for me for this one. Hopefully the tier continues to evolve into a good way. I imagine that we will have another vote at some point this month. And I think that one should be interesting because I'm very curious on like Sneasel and Rabombi, because both of those were evenly split on ban versus do not ban. And so I'm kind of curious as to where they're going to end up. Will more of the council feel like Sneasel or Rabombi is better, or more of them feel like they're worse? I personally feel like if anything, Sneasel would trend more towards being banned and Rabombi more towards being not banned. And the reason mostly is that like Rabombi won't like that steel types have more breathing room, whereas Sneasel doesn't necessarily care that much. And yeah, that's gonna be it for me, man. Hey, if you haven't already, leave a like. Subscribe if you haven't as well, because I think it's like, what, 35% of y'all aren't subscribed? And that's a little bit cringe, so I'd like to make that number 0. Hey, though, that's gonna be it from me. I'll see you guys next time. I hope you enjoy the rest of your even morning, night, whatever. I'm out. Peace.